It's the middle of the night, and a man is hiding in his own family's winepress. His name is Gideon. He's threshing wheat in the dark, in secret. Because if his Midianite enemies see smoke or dust rising from a threshing floor in daylight, they'll come and take everything he has. So he works by moonlight, alone, afraid, wondering, like so many of his people, where God has gone. If you had walked past that winepress that night, you wouldn't have seen anything remarkable. Just a frightened man, working in the dark, trying not to be noticed. And then Gideon looks up. A man is sitting under the oak tree nearby, just sitting there, watching him. "The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor," the stranger says. Gideon almost laughs. If the Lord were with him, would he be hiding wheat from raiders in the dark? You might have asked the same question. But this stranger doesn't leave. He talks with Gideon. He gives him an assignment that will change the future of an entire nation. And before he goes, Gideon brings him a meal, meat, bread, broth, and lays it on a rock as an offering. The stranger reaches out. He touches the meat and the bread with the tip of his staff. Fire bursts from the rock. It consumes everything, the meat, the bread, the rock itself, in an instant. And in that same instant, the stranger is gone. Not walked away, not turned a corner, gone. The angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Hold that thought. Because that word, departed, that sudden vanishing into fire, is something you're going to want to remember. We'll come back to it. Not yet. Here's what you need to know first. This is not a story about an angel, the way you've probably been taught to think of angels. This is not a story about a messenger sent to deliver information and then leave. This is not a story about a created being at all, no matter what title the Bible gives him. This is a story about someone who shows up again and again across the Old Testament, to a frightened woman in the desert, to a father with a knife raised over his son, to a fugitive shepherd standing in front of a bush that burns but is never consumed. And every single time he speaks as God, acts as God, is worshipped as God. And then, at a certain point in history, he stops appearing this way, stops vanishing, stops wearing the disguise. You're about to find out who he really was and why he disappeared. To understand why this matters, you need to go back, centuries before Gideon, to a woman with nowhere left to go. Her name is Hagar. She's an Egyptian servant, pregnant, and she has just run away from the household of Abraham and his wife Sarah after years of mistreatment. She's alone in the wilderness of Shur, sitting by a spring, with no food, no protection, and, as far as she can tell, no future. Imagine being her for a moment. Everything you had has been taken or left behind. No one knows where you are. No one is coming to look for you. And someone finds her there. The angel of the Lord finds her by a spring of water in the wilderness. He speaks to her. He tells her she'll have a son, what to name him, what his life will look like. And Hagar, an Egyptian slave, a woman with no status, no power, no one, says something remarkable afterward. She gives this place a name. She calls it Bir Lahai Roi, and she says, "You are a God of seeing." She doesn't say, "I have met an angel." She says she's been seen by God himself. Think about what that must have felt like. to be the most invisible person in your entire world, and to discover you were never invisible to him. That's the first appearance. But it gets stranger. Move forward a generation. Abraham, Hagar's former master, now an old man, is standing on a mountain called Moriah with his son Isaac. God has asked him to do the unthinkable, to offer his son as a sacrifice. Abraham has built the altar. He's bound Isaac. He's raised the knife. And a voice stops him. "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy." It's the angel of the Lord calling from heaven. And then comes the line that should stop you cold if you read it carefully. "Now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son from me." From me. Not from him, not from the Lord who sent me, from me. The angel of the Lord is speaking in the first person, as the one Abraham's sacrifice was for, as God himself. You could read that verse 100 times and miss it. Most people do. Here's what most people miss. This isn't a one-time slip of language. It's a pattern. And the pattern keeps going. Centuries later, there's a man tending sheep in the wilderness of Midian. He used to be a prince in Egypt. Now he's a fugitive, a shepherd, 80 years old. About as far from his old life as a man can get. His name is Moses. One ordinary afternoon, he sees something that shouldn't exist. A bush, burning but not burning up. The fire keeps going. The branches never blacken, never collapse. Moses moves closer to look. If you'd been standing there, you'd have moved closer too. The angel of the Lord appears to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. God calls to him from inside the fire, tells him to take off his sandals, because the ground he's standing on is holy. And when Moses asks who's sending him, what name he should give the Israelites, the answer that comes back from inside that fire isn't the name of a messenger. It's "I am who I am." 3 men, 3 different centuries. 3 completely different situations. One in a desert with no name, one with a knife raised over his own child, one standing in front of a bush that defies the laws of fire itself. And in every single one of these moments, the figure who appears is called the angel of the Lord, and speaks without hesitation as God. Not a prophet speaking for God. Not a messenger relaying God's words like a letter being read aloud. The figure himself says "I," says "me," says "I am." If a created being said those words to you, if an angel, a created spirit, stood in front of you and said, "I am the one your sacrifice was for," or "I am the one you should take off your sandals for," what would you call that? You'd call it blasphemy. And yet, here it is. Page after page. In some of the most sacred encounters in the entire Old Testament. Stay with me. Because this pattern is about to get even harder to explain away. So let's pause here for a second. You've now seen this figure show up 3 separate times, to Hagar, to Abraham, to Moses, and every time, he speaks as God. Not for God. He says "I," he says "me." He accepts the kind of devotion that in every other place in Scripture is reserved for God alone. And you're only halfway through the evidence. If you're finding this as strange as I did, the first time I really looked at it, do me a favor and hit subscribe before we keep going. Because what comes next is where this pattern stops being strange for you and starts being undeniable. Now let's go back even further than Moses. Back to a man running for his life, not from an army, but from his own brother. His name is Jacob. Years earlier, he tricked his brother Esau out of their father's blessing. And ever since, he's been running. Running from Esau's anger, running from his own past. And on the night before, he's finally going to face his brother again. A brother who once swore to kill him. Jacob sends his family ahead, and he stays behind, alone, at a river crossing called the Jabbok. And in the dark, a man grabs him. They wrestle all night. Jacob, a grown man, a survivor, someone who has outmaneuvered everyone in his life, can't win this fight, and he can't escape it either. As the sun starts to rise, the stranger touches Jacob's hip, and Jacob's hip is wrenched out of its socket. Just like that, with a touch. Think about that for a second. If you've ever wrestled with something all night, a decision, a fear, a memory you can't put down, you know what it's like to hold on long after your strength is gone. And still Jacob holds on. "I will not let you go unless you bless me," he says. The stranger asks his name, changes it, tells Jacob he has struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. And then Jacob does something that should make you stop and reread the page. He names the place. He calls it Peniel, which means face of God, and he says, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." A man, alone, in the dark, wrestling all night with a figure who touches his body and changes his name and his identity, and walks away saying, he has seen God. Face to face and lived. Pay attention to this, because the Hebrew word used for this figure across many of these stories is malach, which simply means messenger. It's the same word the Bible uses for the angels who appeared to the shepherds outside Bethlehem. The same ordinary word. And that's exactly what makes this so strange. The word itself is plain, unremarkable. Messenger. But look at what these messengers say. Look at what they do. Look at what they're called. There's one more thing you need to see before we get to the part of this story that changes everything. Fast forward again, past Jacob's 12 sons, past 400 years in Egypt, past the burning bush and the Red Sea, and 40 years in the wilderness. Moses has died. A new leader stands at the edge of the promised land, looking at the walled city of Jericho. His name is Joshua. The night before the battle, Joshua looks up and sees a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword. "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Joshua asks. The answer he gets is not what you'd expect. Neither, the figure says. "But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." And Joshua, a battle-hardened military leader, a man who has just led an entire nation across a riverbed on dry ground, falls on his face to the ground and worships. Now watch what happens next. Or rather, watch what doesn't happen. The figure doesn't stop him. This matters more than it might seem, because later in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, the apostle John falls down to worship an angel, and the angel immediately stops him. "You must not do that," the angel says. "Worship God." A created angel, faced with worship, refuses it every time. Because worship belongs to God alone, and a created being knows it. But here, at Jericho, The commander of the army of the Lord lets Joshua worship him. He doesn't correct him, doesn't redirect him, accepts it. This is not a coincidence. This is not a strange custom of the ancient world that you can just write off as something people did back then. This is not a created angel having an off day. This is the same figure who spoke from the burning bush, who stopped Abraham's knife, who found Hagar in the desert, showing up again in a different disguise, doing the exact same thing every time. Speaking as God, acting as God, receiving worship as God. By now you've seen it 5 times. Hagar, Abraham, Moses, Jacob, Joshua. 5 different people, 5 different centuries, 5 different situations. And one figure, moving through all of them, wearing the plain, ordinary title of messenger, while being treated every single time as God himself. Here's the part nobody tells you. The story isn't done yet. And the next 2 times this figure shows up, he's going to do something he's never done before. So let's go back to where we started. Gideon, the threshing floor, the fire that rises from the rock and consumes the offering, and the figure who vanishes the instant it happens. There's one more story like it, and it belongs to a couple you've probably never heard of. Manoah and his wife from the tribe of Dan. They have no children, and one day, the angel of the Lord appears to Manoah's wife and tells her she's going to have a son who will be set apart for God from birth. His name will be Samson. Later, Manoah meets this figure himself and asks him a simple question: "What is your name?" And the answer he gets should sound familiar to you by now. Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? In some translations, that word is rendered too wonderful, too great, too far beyond Manoah for him to even hold in his mind. Then Manoah offers a sacrifice. And just like with Gideon, fire goes up from the altar toward heaven, and the angel of the Lord ascends in the flame of the altar, right in front of them, up and gone. Manoah is terrified. "We shall surely die," he tells his wife, "for we have seen God." And this is where it gets remarkable. Think about everything you've seen so far. A figure who speaks as God, who is worshipped as God, whose name is too wonderful to even say out loud, who appears in fire, in flame, in a burning bush, on an altar, and then vanishes again and again and again. For hundreds of years, this is the pattern. He shows up. He does something only God could do. And then he disappears, like smoke, like flame, like a dream you wake up from. Until one day, he doesn't disappear anymore. Because hundreds of years after Manoah watched that flame rise into the night sky, a baby is born in a small town called Bethlehem. And the very first chapter of the book of John tells you exactly what, or who, that baby is. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Word, in Greek, logos, the same eternal, divine person who had been showing up throughout the Old Testament, speaking as God, accepting worship as God, then vanishing like fire into the night, finally arrives. And this time, he doesn't vanish. He gets hungry. He gets tired. He bleeds. He eats fish on a beach with his friends after rising from the dead. He lets a doubting follower named Thomas put his fingers into the wounds in his hands. The God who used to appear for a moment and disappear into flame now stays. He walks dusty roads for 33 years, eats at tables, falls asleep in boats, dies, and rises, permanently, physically, never to vanish again. This isn't a new idea invented to make Old Testament passages less strange. As early as the 2nd century, a Christian writer named Justin Martyr argued exactly this: that the figure called the angel of the Lord, the one who spoke to Abraham and Moses and the rest, was the same person Christians knew as Jesus, appearing before he was ever born as a man. Here's a way to picture it, and I want you to really sit with this for a moment. Imagine someone has been writing to you for years, slipping letters under your door, helping you in ways you never fully understood, signing each one with a different name, never staying long enough for you to see his face. And then one day, there's no letter. There's a knock. And when you open the door, you finally see who has been there, behind every letter, all along. That's what the incarnation is. Not God showing up for the first time. God taking off the disguise he'd been wearing for thousands of years and staying. He doesn't have to vanish in fire anymore. He doesn't have to appear for a moment and disappear before you can hold on to him. He came to stay. So what do you do with all of this? Here's the first thing to remember. Across at least 7 major encounters in the Old Testament, with Hagar, with Abraham, with Moses, with Jacob, with Joshua, with Gideon, with Manoah, a figure called the angel of the Lord speaks as God, acts as God, and is worshipped as God in a way no created angel ever is anywhere else in Scripture. That's not a small detail buried in a footnote. That's a pattern that runs through the entire Old Testament. Here's the second thing, and this one is for you personally. If that pattern points to who many believe it points to, the pre-incarnate Christ, walking through human history long before Bethlehem, then it means the God who finds people in their lowest moments didn't start doing that on the night Jesus was born. He was already doing it. To a frightened, pregnant woman with nowhere to go. To an exhausted shepherd hiding in the dark. To a man wrestling alone with his own past at a river crossing at night. He was already finding people like that. Long before any of them knew his name. And long before you knew yours. And here's the last thing, the one I want you to sit with. For thousands of years, God showed up, did something only he could do, and then disappeared. Like fire, like smoke, like a voice from a bush that goes quiet again. And then he came and he stayed. He's not going to vanish on you. Not this time. Not ever again. So tell me, out of everything we just walked through, which appearance of the angel of the Lord surprised you the most? Hagar in the wilderness, Joshua at Jericho, the fire on Gideon's rock? Tell me below. Because the same God who kept showing up in disguise isn't hiding from you either.